transition was provided through Catholic schools. No question about it. Now, I'm going to refer to Father Andrew Greeley's sociological research because he undertook some years ago through National Opinion Research of Chicago a rather exhaustive study of Catholic schools because he went in with this open mind. He wanted to know whether Catholic schools make any difference. And then secondly, is it worth it to sponsor all these schools? After exhaustive research, his answer was yes on both counts. Then how to explain the shift? Well, there are a number of factors. One is we found ourselves with areas of population growth where churches and schools weren't in the exodus from major urban areas out. The other, and it's an interesting phenomenon, he said, despite words that were said of support, he said a number of bishops stopped pressing hard for financing and expansion of Catholic schools. Not all, but he said there was a shift in leadership conviction about it. In addition, growing financial demands that made it harder and harder for local parishes to support it because the living endowment was increasingly not there. Is this picture beginning to make some sense to you as such? But what was intriguing to me in the research is he points out there are clearly measurable influences traceable to Catholic education in terms of greater tendency to pursue a religious vocation, greater tendency to serve in leadership roles in the church, greater tendency to perdure throughout one's life with Catholicism. Now, is that a guarantee? Absolutely not. These are just tendencies, but there was a clear differential. And having worked with a number of directors of religious education who work in non-school programs, they tell me they know the constricted window they have to work in. Most DREs tell me they have 24 hours to reach the young in a typical year. And in a highly demanding cultural setting like our own, you can see, in reference to what Anthony said, the very narrow boutique, do you know what I'm saying, that can be addressed within those 24 hours. The work they do is heroic, but in no way could you say overall it would have the same permeating effect traditionally as it, nor should you expect it. But there was some kind of magical thinking that if we just took the money we were using for schools and transformed it here, we'd get the same results. Well, the answer is very clearly, you can't. The other thing is, it's very clear, and Father Joe O'Keefe, who's a specialist in Catholic school financing at BC, said, you can't finance Catholic schools along the old model. Otherwise, you end up with what is the equivalent of the Darwinian survival of the fittest. What you have to start doing is thinking like a Catholic. We are not Congregationalists. By that I mean we are not a church that is essentially rooted in the local church. We are a communion of churches. Well, it means then with some of these undertakings, and Greeley documents this, the most successful public outreach to the larger society by the Roman Catholic Church is its schools. This is not to diminish the hospitals or other endeavors, but the most profound influence we've had on American culture has come through Catholic schools. But he said you can't finance them, according to Father Joe O'Keefe. But does this mean changing our ways of thinking? Oh my. And does it mean that we must move away from simply repeating the patterns of the past? And the answer is yes, and it's hard. As one of my colleagues at Regis said, and he's a noted progressive, politically speaking, he said, I must confess, Ernie, even people who are so enthusiastic about change have great difficulty doing it in their own lives. And that's an honest statement. An honest statement. But do we need to be in touch with the culture of the young? Yes. And I thank my students daily for keeping me from this possible disaster in education, that I might become the clueless professor. No, they do. If you listen to them and you regard them as worthy, it doesn't mean there won't be challenges, but I find a lot of goodness. I also find hunger in the young, but how you reach that hunger is going to take some real innovation, because simply expecting the old avenues to work wouldn't necessarily happen. And a short comment might be good. I gave my students in Meaning of Faith, for the first 2 weeks, I asked them to research major video clips that reveal grace and faith. They went at it with abandon, and they commented extensively because they are such a visual and oral culture. If I had said to them, would you research a number of texts in the first 2 weeks of this class that have been prominent in your life, I fear the list would be much more slender. But boy, could I use it. And I just here want to commend Christ the King, because, as I said to Judy and Monsignor Hoy, your website, your technology is exemplary. That Catholics and other interested people could go to your website, access the information they now have, including tonight, is evangelization in the modern age. It is. Thank you.
Good evening.
Good evening.
Professor, I just had a quick comment and
Sure.
then a question. I guess, first comment, I couldn't help but be thinking as I first read your poster and sat here in the hall, I couldn't help but wonder, you know, how many people would have been here tonight not to hear a presentation on how to save the church, but to how the church might save us. And I think there's a kind of sadness there. I think part of this is my editorial comment, but
that's all right.
But part of our concerns and love of the church are also being manipulated by this kind of hysteria of this notion of crisis. And I think, you know, I'm a devotee of sports talk radio. You certainly get a lot more interesting calls when the Red Sox are losing than when the Red Sox are winning. So I think there's part of human nature that we need to look at. The second thing is that I would wonder about is, you know, it seems to me that whenever we talk about the scandal and the implications of all the woundedness that's in our church,
yep.
You know, the need to, the energies seem to focus on, and I think rightly so, how we respond to engaging the culture, understanding the culture, you know, meeting the culture where it's at, you know, being in the world but not of the world.
Right.
And you mentioned, and so from that standpoint, how authority grows, how we utilize, you know, the feminine genius in a different way, all of that makes sense. But, you know, there's another side of this. It seems to me that also at the heart of Catholicism isn't simply tradition. It's the idea of a magisterium to begin with. That sacramental life can't, no matter how many people are receiving communion, sacramental life cannot be what it is meant to be unless all of the sacraments and all of the Word is an integral part of the Catholic lifestyle. It seems to me the Church bears responsibility in the last 30 years for de-emphasizing those very things so that we have Catholics who are not as passionate about prayerful life and sacrificial life as Catholics.